It was still relatively early in the semester at that stage, so I never really gave that topic much more thought. We continued to read, listen, learn, discuss and explore. Then during a class in about month 3, the teacher was explaining the inequality of all men being lazy and abusive in the home. I had never heard this allegation before, and noting I've always been a leader and doer when it comes to cleanliness, hygiene, and order, I simply could not relate to the accusation of doing nothing in the home merely because I was male. The allegation further confused me because the first half of the semester was ensuring we did not objectify, categorize or marginalize an individual, simply because of their gender. Yet, this was exactly what the class was doing at every opportunity from this point, objectifying and discriminating against an individual because of their gender and or skin color. At this stage of the course, there was still a little space of permission for me to talk, so I stated something along the lines of, well, I do heaps around the home. Actually, I do pretty much everything. I don't think it's fair to say all men are lazy, because some women may have chosen to marry a lazy loser. The class went silent and looked to the lecturer for a response. In hindsight, I actually think they were in fact looking to their leader to see how they should react. "Bob, what do you mean by that?" she condescendingly asked. I could feel the tension in the room build, but again, sitting within what I felt was safe space, I replied with what I thought, and still think was perfectly logical. I said something close to, well, a relationship is between two people, hopefully, two adults. If two adults in a relationship together can't work out what is right and fair to do in the home, I don't think it's society's fault, I think it's a bad relationship. For example, I do everything around the home, but if I entered a relationship with a woman who was lazy and did nothing, I would ask her to help. If she continued to do nothing, I don't think it would be fair to openly categorize all women as being lazy. Rather, I'd look at the control I have of my own life and the relationships I choose to be a part of and act accordingly. Essentially, if a person is dating someone who is lazy and doesn't contribute to the relationship, either person could and should leave at any time and take control of their life. I think it's sexist to say an entire gender is lazy because some don't do work around the home. She wasn't happy as she dropped her head into her hands in disbelief and said as she shook her head and sighed, "Bob, I can't believe you'd say this. How can you possibly think this way?" Completely stunned at the question, and noting I was the only guy in the class dealing with the shift to man-hating, I suddenly felt cornered, singled out and vulnerable to a sexist attack, ironically in a subject that was aimed to stop sexism. I thought then, as I do now, that individuals have the power to choose a loser or a winner to live with. I thought a strong, empowered and equal woman had the strength, power, and intellect to simply walk away from a loser. After all, this is what the class was really about, female empowerment. Yet apparently, this empowerment did not extend to actually taking control of one's actions, for example not living with bum, and instead, blaming all men everywhere in order to deflect any action, or lack thereof, by a woman who chooses to continue to live with a lazy partner. Consequently, I reluctantly backed down and professed to not properly understanding how one woman's choices and actions should result in an entire gender being held accountable for those preferences and behaviors. I was publicly forced to accept fault for a woman, all women, whom I've never met. This is when I could see the next fundamental principle of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 2. A woman is an individual who is free and powerful to choose whatever she wants. However, no man is allowed to have an opinion on her choices. But all men must be held accountable for any and every choice she makes. I first lost the support of the teacher, not that I really think my gender ever gave me the chance to earn it in the first place for having an opinion, and then began to lose the rest of the class's support after I asked a question about a woman's right and responsibility to not marry, tolerate or live with a loser. To be fair, the teacher was not entirely unprofessional, and I did finish the course. But one can only imagine the outcry if a male professor screened or objectified a female student wanting to join his engineering course. Riots, rallies and forced resignations all around. Treating someone differently because of their gender, I thought, was sexist. However, this is not the case in a gender studies class. sexism, racism, and the marginalization of straight white men in gender studies is not only allowed, but it's also preached. Within the West's women's and gender studies curriculums, treating women differently because of their gender is rightfully identified as misogynistic, sexist and wrong. Whilst treating a man differently because of his gender is hypocritically sermonized as being empowering, fair and morally right. This is the foundation of fourth-wave feminism. Women are victims who are entitled to compensation and positive discrimination at every point in life irrespective of her character or conduct. Whilst all men, even the white male-dominated homeless, are to be categorized as privileged sexist racists who must be penalized and silenced in all instances, irrespective of his conduct or character. I later lost the friendships within the class entirely during our daily check-in when one of my classmates shared her experience of how she was sexually harassed during the weekend. She explained that on the preceding Saturday night, she had attended a popular nightclub in Hollywood after spending the day getting her hair and nails done, followed by the purchase of a new outfit, all in preparation for her big night out. She explained that whilst standing at the bar of the club, a man told her in passing that she looked nice. The class immediately burst into life with disgust at how something so sexist could occur. Everyone rallied around her to support her in what she was relaying as a sexist attack on her being. Completely confused, I needed to seek more information, hence gently raised my hand and asked, I'm sorry, I must have missed something. Did he use a bad word with you? No. She replies. Did he insult, attack or embarrass you? I asked. No, he told me I looked nice, Bob. She firmly stated. I'm really sorry, but I'm still not getting this. Did he touch or grab you in any way? I inquire. No way, he'd never touch this. She jokes with the class's support as she points at her body. And after he told you he looked nice, what did he do? I query. Nothing, he just told me I looked nice and kept walking. She said. Oh. Well, did you look nice? I questioned. Yes, of course I looked nice. She aggressively replies. But men shouldn't harass me when I'm minding my own business to tell me I look nice. I know I look nice, I don't need a man to tell me that. She proclaimed as the entire class looked at me and nodded in her support. Completely confused but desperately seeking to understand, I gently say, I'm sorry, I really don't understand. It's a Saturday night, you dress up nicely and go to a nightclub, a social venue where people go to meet and interact with other people. A gentleman in that social venue compliments you appropriately. He never touches, insults or badgers you, then kept walking by. Which part of that interaction was sexual harassment? Utterly bewildered, and now in the process of being squeezed out of the club, sorry, class, for my question. I could see the eyes of the newly evolved fourth-wave feminists look down upon me with disgust and rage. In one last attempt to bring logic to the discussion, and knowing I was in a room full of people who'd been successfully conditioned to loathe my gender collectively, hence me individually, I attempted to bring reason to tension within the room by saying, I could understand this to be a kind of harassment if it were in the workplace, at school, or during a funeral. I'd also categorize it as a crime or harassment if he touched you, or if he commented on your breasts or used vulgar words, or if he didn't leave you alone, or if you were a child, or if you were intimately involved with another person. But you just explained you made considerable effort to dress nicely to go to a nightclub, and someone in that club gave you a compliment in passing to which you agreed with, and now you constitute that as sexual harassment. I didn't know that appropriate compliments at an appropriate time in an appropriate venue was sexual harassment. The entire class lit up and hurled explanation after elucidation of how such behavior by men, irrespective of being in a nightclub or any social setting, is sexist, disgusting, misogynistic, judgmental, degrading and even a form of violence against women. Again, the teacher jumped in and expressed her immense disappointment with my questions, and I was quickly pushed back into submission. This is when I learned the next rule of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 3. Questions are never permitted within fourth-wave feminism. Any question that posed to introduce logic or even a tiny slice of perspective was to be treated with absolute disdain, anger and sensation. I began to believe that women were repulsed by men's attraction to them whilst being confused as to why everything for the fourth-wave feminist revolved around body image and how she looks. The relationship between a woman and her vagina was now the focus of the class. What I couldn't understand was the predicament of a woman claiming she did not want to be attractive, yet continually placed emphasis on women's bodies and feeling attractive or redefining what being sexy meant. Surely not all women are seeking physical approval from all other women, or are they? This is when I learned the next rule of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 4. You must be obsessed with any and everything related to body image whilst blaming all men for your obsession. By month 3, I had been silenced and ostracized from the class entirely. I genuinely felt the curriculum was making me dumber, and I sincerely had no idea what the hell feminism was really about, as I had not yet properly made the distinction between first, second, third, and now fourth-wave feminism. The reason why I had not yet made the distinction at that time was because the teacher had presented each wave as one consistent movement. This is key to the extreme feminists' indoctrination of vulnerable minds. Remove the distinctions and you lose perspective. Lose perspective and you lose logic. Lose logic and all you're really left with is emotion. Act only on emotion without perspective or logic and you're likely to do something irrational. That is the fundamental shortcoming of the social movement that operates under the stolen banner of feminism. It is irrationally emotion and seeks to hate and divide, rather than love and synergize. This is when I learned the next rule of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 5. There is no time or space for logic, truth, reason, love or synergy. Nonetheless, I continued to turn up to every class keen to learn but scared to talk. When it came to my turn to check in, as we always did, I no longer felt safe to share anything, hence, I basically sat in silence for the remainder of the semester. I was no longer encouraged to talk, and I think the teacher was quietly satisfied that the minority in the class had been permanently silenced, which revealed the next rule of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 6. Publicly shame and socially ostracize anyone who stands in the way of the movement. When it came time to writing essays, which was most of the assessment for the class, I tried my best to regurgitate whatever the teacher wanted to hear, but ultimately, I was scored dead last in every assessment submitted. To be fair, maybe I was only capable of achieving good grades in every other subject except women's studies, who knows? The immense focus on poverty throughout the course was evidently not intended to recognize everyone who endures poverty, just those who were female and or not white. For example, I was so desperately poor when I studied in the US, I typically ate only one meal a day. I realize this sounds hypocritical in the sense that I was a first-world student studying abroad at a prestigious university, but the reality was I had no money to buy even the basics. I was on an exchange program, thus had paid the much lower Australian university rates, of which I had deferred on student higher education loans anyway. At the time of my studies in the US, the Australian dollar was the lowest it had ever been. 1 Australian dollar would get me a mere 50 US cents, and I had been scraping by as a full-time student for the years before the exchange. The ridiculously high and compulsory accommodation fees combined with the appalling exchange rate completely wiped out all my savings on day one. My student visa only permitted me to work 20 hours per week on campus at a pay rate of $5.25 per hour. Essentially, I was living in arguably the most expensive part of the US, if not the entire world, on a capped income of $105 a week before tax, paid monthly, and that was only if the hours were available were made to me by the employer. I worked 3 jobs on campus that semester and still rarely got to work the hours I needed to survive. On the surface, I'm sure I was judged as a privileged white male attending a prestigious university thanks to a rich white daddy. The reality is that I was raised in poverty in a broken home, was not in receipt of a scholarship, and doing this entirely by myself and legitimately struggling to afford food, let alone textbooks and compulsory field trips to overpriced vegan restaurants and lesbian stand-up acts through Los Angeles and Hollywood. As an example of my financial struggles, When it came to writing assignments for me, I had to write all of them with a pen, as I simply could not afford the printing of an essay, particularly at the preposterously high printing prices per page on a private campus. So, despite the immense increase to my workload in handwriting essays, I was ironically heavily penalized by my women's studies teacher for failing to submit typed assignments. Even when I explained to her that I would much prefer to type the essays but simply had no money to print them, marks were openly and hypocritically deducted for my poverty, whilst we were lectured about stamping out discrimination against those who were poor. Despite my requests to submit my assignments via email, knowing full well that the teacher had unlimited access to free printing, she said no. The refusal to consider my situation of poverty adversely affected my grades only in women's studies. Paradoxically, the lecturers of my other subjects in business supported my situation entirely and allowed me to email them all assignments without penalty. Adhering to the hypocrisy that is fourth-wave feminism, the only class that implored society never discriminated against those without money. Women's studies was the only class that discriminated against me for not having money. This is when I learned the next rule of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 7. White men are never to be afforded help, even if it's your job to do so. There were so many positive experiences for me as an Australian exchange student in the US. I was dating, playing rugby for the university, going to parties, surfing, working part-time, continually meeting new people, and of course, managing full-time tertiary education. The distractions, adventures, pressures, and commitments I was concurrently handling meant I got over the loss of my feminist family quickly. The roller coaster ride that was women's studies was disappointing, but far from devastating. Nonetheless, the utter tragedy in this scenario is how a group of amazingly happy, beautiful, intelligent young women, with otherwise unlimited potential to achieve anything they wanted, devolved into the angry, bitter, man-hating group of self-proclaimed victims who believed they were oppressed by an imaginary patriarchal boys' club in just 4 months. Nearly half of the all-female class had dumped or been dumped by their boyfriends by the end of the semester. All but one girl in the class, a lovely girl from Texas, went from bubbly, cheerful, friendly, delightful people with beautiful feminine energy to depressed, bitter, self-proclaimed victims who felt entitled to everything, especially if it came at the expense of men, especially the white ones. It truly was horrible. This is where I learned the next rule of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 8. The survival and expansion of fourth-wave feminism are achieved through exploiting the insecurities of young women and self-doubting men. I had grown deeply fond of all my classmates. The first 2 months was amazing and something I recall with great clarity and happiness to this day. I was on exchange at a spectacular university, everything was new or different, and my mind was being opened to more and more. I went to places no men were allowed and saw things I hadn't previously considered. We learned the unknown unknowns. We went out and saw movie stars whilst eating lentils at some hippie vegan restaurant in LA, blowing my budget for 2 weeks, and tutored poor black children in ghettos. We shared our most inner thoughts, and laughed, learned and cried together. I genuinely felt close to these young women, and they were, I thought, legitimately my friends. Gender or sexuality never came into it except for one time after eating at the lentil restaurant. One of my classmates held my hand on the car ride back to campus. She initiated the entire thing, entered my space, touched me and implied sexual attraction. Though we held hands in the back seat like teenagers on a first date, it went nowhere as I wasn't really into her. Although according to the definitions within feminism, I had just been borderline raped, especially as she had also touched my leg and hand without consent, I felt neither objectified nor harassed. It just felt like two humans briefly connecting. Innocently, if anything, it was a warm memory that is seemingly book-worthy. But in reflecting on the only romantic experience of the class, I now see the irony in it being carried out by the same girl who has screamed sexual harassment just weeks earlier for a guy who had told her she looked nice in a club. She had regularly bragged about shutting guys down and being rude to them because all men are predators, yet here she was preying on the Australian minority. This only reinstated a rule the class had taught me earlier. There are two standards. one for white men and another for everyone else. The utter disdain toward men learned by students of feminism led me to wonder just how many first-world women, brainwashed to despise and repel all men as sexual predators, have missed out on these little cute moments in life. Little moments where men and women come into intimate, yet entirely innocent contact. From a gentle brush of the hand to a peck the cheek. From a hug and a hello to deep and powerful sexual relationships that leave warm memories for 2 lifetimes. All of these human experiences are lost forever to appease the rhetoric and unbalanced emotion that is fourth-wave feminism. It's this realization that leads to the next rule instilled by the feminists who are bitter and or repulsive. Rule 9, if I can't achieve love, lust, romance or intimacy, no one can, but especially any man and the young and attractive woman who still has a chance.